I just had this utter sensation of disbelief, and I was saying, they can't be gone, she can't be gone, she must be there. Kate was screaming hysterically that she'd checked and she was gone and someone had taken her. You're just thrown into this absolute nightmare. Terrifying ordeal. I think the worst thing that could happen to a parent.
There was no abduction, no break-in, no struggle. Madeleine McCann died inside apartment 5A, and her father, Jerry McCann, hid her body just meters away in the undergrowth behind the building. The blood beneath the tiles, the cadaver scent, the missing tennis bag, and a silent hour no one could explain all point to one truth: this wasn't a kidnapping. It was a cover-up, and while the world searched far and wide, her body lay still, unseen, in the dark brush right where he left her. Jerry McCann stated that he checked on Madeleine around 9:05 p.m. on the night of May 3, 2007. According to his account, everything seemed normal. Madeleine was supposedly asleep in her bed, and nothing appeared out of place. However, this check, though seemingly routine, would later become a focal point in one of the most controversial timelines in true crime history. Earlier that night, at approximately 9 p.m., their friend Matt Oldfield volunteered to check on the McCann children, while the group dined together at the tapas restaurant nearby. According to Matt, when he entered the apartment, he did not see Madeleine in her bed. He briefly glanced into the other room, but did not conduct a thorough check. Crucially, Matt did not raise an alarm. Instead, he returned to the restaurant and told the group that everything was fine. His failure to react to the absence of a child, especially given the responsibility entrusted to him, remains one of the most debated points in this timeline. This detail, as described in some reconstructions and unofficial analyses, conflicts with the official police statements. In the established narrative, Matt was not supposed to have noticed anything unusual. Yet, in this alternate version, he notices Madeleine is not in bed, but no immediate action is taken. This discrepancy feeds into the larger suspicion surrounding that crucial 1-hour window between 9:05 p.m. and 10 p.m. At 10 p.m., Kate McCann went to check on the children and discovered Madeleine was missing. This was the moment when the alarm was officially raised. Only after 10 p.m. did the group begin calling out Madeleine's name in the streets, alerting other tourists, and finally contacting authorities. By then, nearly an hour had passed since Jerry's 9:05 p.m. check and Matt's ambiguous 9 p.m. observation. This near 60-minute window remains one of the most problematic gaps in the timeline. No independent witnesses saw or heard anything from the McCanns during this period. It was as if the apartment fell into a dead silence until it was too late. Beyond the timeline, there are critical details from the scene that were either ignored or underemphasized in the early investigation. One such detail was the back door. The rear door of the apartment was reportedly left open, leading directly to a garden area and a path lined with bushes and tennis courts. This exit point had no surveillance, no lighting, and was barely visible at night. If someone wanted to remove a body discreetly, it would be the most logical route. Another curious detail, the state of the curtains and windows. While the window in the children's room was reported to be open, forensic investigators found no evidence of forced entry, no broken latches, no scratches, no footprints or fingerprints. Despite this, Jerry and Kate McCann insisted early on that Madeleine had been abducted through that very window. This inconsistency became one of the cornerstones for those who questioned the abduction theory. Adding to the unease was the testimony of neighbor Pamela Fenn. Living in the apartment directly above 5A, she reported hearing Madeleine crying for over an hour the night before the disappearance. The girl's distress seemed prolonged and unresolved. Pamela's account also suggests a pattern. Madeleine might have been used to getting up and searching for her parents at night, a behavior observed back in their home in Leicester as well. These fragmented observations set the stage for one haunting hypothesis. Madeleine may have woken up once again that night, looking for her parents. Hearing her father talking with Jeremy Wilkins on the street outside, she could have climbed onto the couch in the living room. From there, she may have tried to peer out the window to see him. I believe she stood either on the backrest of the couch or on the small windowsill. In doing so, she could have lost her balance and fallen headfirst onto the hard, tiled floor. The fall, estimated to be from a height of 1.80 meters, could have caused fatal cranial trauma. Experts point out that at her age, Madeleen's skull may not have fully ossified, making her more vulnerable to a catastrophic head injury. This theory, while disturbing, would explain why blood traces and cadaver scent were later detected near the couch and floor area by specialized sniffer dogs. If true, the sequence of events on May 3 was not the result of an outside intruder, but a tragic accident left undiscovered, deliberately concealed, during that critical hour. Among the most compelling and haunting aspects of the Madeleine McCann case are the reactions of two specialized police dogs, Eddie and Keela, brought in to detect traces of death and human blood. These animals were not ordinary pets. They were elite members of the South Yorkshire Police K9 unit, trained to perform highly specialized tasks in forensic investigations. When deployed at the McCann's holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, both dogs reacted strongly and consistently in areas of concern. Eddie was alerted in the bedroom where Madeleine had reportedly slept. More precisely, he reacted to the corner area behind the wardrobe in her room, a place that was out of view and not typically accessed. The specificity of his alert suggests not just a generalized reaction, but a focused response tied to the presence of a cadaver at that location. Eddie also reacted to a second unexpected object: Kate McCann's clothing. More precisely, to one of her jackets. The implications of this alert have sparked controversy and speculation. Was Kate somehow involved in handling a deceased Madeleine, or did the scent transfer through indirect contact? There are innocent explanations, but the consistency of the cadaver dog's reactions adds weight to the suspicions. More disturbing still were the alerts in and around the Renault Scenic vehicle the McCanns rented 24 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Both Eddie and Keela signaled inside the trunk of the car. Eddie detected the scent of human decomposition, while Keela responded to blood traces in the same space. The overlap of these two reactions at the same location is especially damning. Forensic scientists later retrieved samples from the car's trunk, and the DNA results revealed a 15 out of 19 marker match with Madeleine's genetic profile. While not conclusive in a legal sense, it was statistically significant. Adding to the puzzle, both dogs also reacted to the car key fob, another object linked to the Renault Scenic. These consistent reactions across separate, but related evidence points suggest a broader pattern of contact between Madeleine's remains and items handled by her parents after the date she was reported missing. The discoveries weren't limited to the car. Inside the apartment itself, Keela discovered blood traces under the ceramic tiles in the living room area. These were not mere smudges. The location of the traces correlated with other signs, such as the position of the couch and the area where Eddie had earlier detected cadaver scent. Investigators noted that the blood spatter patterns were consistent with impact-related injury, suggesting a traumatic fall or blow, not a minor cut or nosebleed. However, the biological traces appeared to have been altered. Forensic analysis showed signs that the area had been cleaned with water, possibly in an effort to reduce visible indicators. Still, the attempt was incomplete. Thanks to her specialized training, Keela was able to detect minute residues that had settled beneath the surface. This leads to an important scientific detail. The ceramic tiles in the apartment were installed over grout, a cement-based filler used between joints. Over time, especially with changing temperatures, the tiles naturally expand and contract. This subtle movement can create microgaps where fluids may pass through. In this instance, the diluted traces had seeped into these tiny spaces beneath the tiles, hidden from sight but detectable by Keela's advanced abilities. As temperatures fluctuated in the days following Madeleine's disappearance, these natural shifts in the flooring likely caused the remaining traces to settle even deeper below. It was in these concealed areas, beneath the polished tile surface, that Keela found indicators embedded within the structure of the apartment. This kind of hidden evidence, undetectable by standard visual examination, provided a crucial clue about what might have occurred that night. The consistent alerts from both trained dogs across several areas, such as the apartment, personal items, the vehicle, and even the car key, paint a possible sequence of events. If something irreversible had happened to Madeleine inside the apartment, it's plausible she remained there temporarily, was later moved, and eventually transported using the Renault Scenic. The trace patterns align more closely with such a timeline than with the theory of an abduction by an unknown party, leaving no physical evidence behind. DNA findings, while not legally definitive, further reinforce this. A 15 of 19 marker match is highly statistically significant. Critics argue that mixed samples or environmental contamination could explain the result, but those arguments grow weaker when placed alongside the totality of canine evidence. Trained dogs like Eddie and Keela do not guess. They react based on olfactory recognition sharpened through years of practice and proven accuracy in controlled environments. Ultimately, the dog alerts do not confirm how Madeleine died, nor do they identify who was responsible. But they strongly challenge the official abduction narrative. They tell a story hidden under floor tiles, in the fibers of clothing, and deep within the trunk of a rental car. A story of blood and silence. Two separate eyewitness accounts, both describing a man carrying a small child in Praia da Luz on the night of May 3, 2007, have become some of the most hotly debated pieces of the Madeleine McCann case. Though often dismissed or minimized in official channels, these accounts taken together offer a chilling possibility that Madeleine was not abducted by a stranger, but carried away by someone much closer. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner, a friend of the McCanns and a member of the Tapas 7 group, stepped outside the restaurant where the adults were dining. As she passed by the street in front of apartment 5A, she noticed a man walking by. He was holding a small child, specifically, a girl carried sideways in his arms. The child was wearing a thin, light-colored nightgown. Her head hung to one side, limp and motionless. Jane later described this detail with a level of unease that has never fully left the narrative. Crucially, Jane Tanner was not just a random tourist. She knew the McCanns personally and had been dining with them that very night. Her testimony placed a man carrying a blonde-haired child only meters away from the McCanns' apartment, during the exact window when Madeleine was likely to have already been missing or worse. Yet, for reasons never fully clarified, her sighting was not considered pivotal in the initial police response. The identity of the man she saw remains unresolved. Fast forward 45 minutes to around 10 p.m. Another eyewitness comes into focus: Martin Smith, a man from Ireland vacationing with his family in the same village. Smith and his family were walking home when they encountered a man descending toward the beach area. This man, too, was carrying a young girl. The child was around 3 to 4 years old, with blonde hair and notably no shoes. Her body appeared limp, her head tilted unnaturally to one side, and she showed no signs of movement or resistance. Martin Smith, at the time, did not associate the encounter with the unfolding McCann drama. It was only days later, after seeing television footage of Jerry McCann returning to the UK, while holding one of his twins in a similar fashion, that Smith experienced a disturbing realization. He was, in his own words, 80% sure that the man he had seen that night was Jerry McCann himself. This percentage is not casually thrown out. It came after a measured consideration of the man's build, posture, gait, and most notably, the specific way he cradled the child. According to Smith, the manner in which Jerry held his daughter on TV was exactly the same as the man he saw on May 3. It wasn't just the visuals, it was body memory, something that experienced eyewitnesses tend to rely on more than surface features. This raises a daunting possibility. If Martin Smith did indeed see Jerry McCann carrying Madeleine already lifeless in his arms, then the official story collapses. It would mean that Madeleine had already died by then, and her body was being quietly removed from the scene, while the clock still ticked before Kate's public discovery an outcry at 10 p.m. Let's examine the route both Jane Tanner and Martin Smith describe. The man Tanner saw at 9:15 p.m. was heading east, toward the road that wraps around the back of the apartment blocks, toward the direction of scrubland and unlit paths. Martin Smith saw his man heading downhill toward the beach, also through an unlit, rarely trafficked area. These are not typical routes one would take if trying to reach a populated area, but they are ideal if one wanted to avoid detection, especially when carrying something or someone that shouldn't be seen. The area surrounding apartment 5A includes overgrown bushes, a garden path, and unmonitored walking trails. It was later confirmed that the police did not conduct a detailed search of this zone during the critical first night. This absence of early search activity makes it a prime location for a temporary concealment. It also fits perfectly with the theory that Madelein's body was hidden nearby, to be retrieved and moved later once the public chaos had calmed. There's another damning factor: context. By 10 p.m., Madeleine had already been reported missing. Police had not yet arrived, but the McCanns and their friends were allegedly calling out her name around the complex. Why, then, would any man be walking calmly down an unlit path, carrying a barefoot, limp child that matched the missing girl's description? It defies logic unless that person wasn't searching for her, but instead getting rid of her. The sighting by Jane Tanner becomes even more relevant when you consider the time gap. Madeleine was last seen at approximately 9 p.m., and Kate didn't raise the alarm until just before 10 p.m. That's nearly an hour of undocumented activity. Jerry McCann claimed to have checked on Madeleine around 9:05 p.m. and found nothing wrong. But what if she had already fallen, or died, in that window? What if Jerry discovered her shortly after, and rather than alerting others, chose to hide her? Martin Smith's account fits that timeline with uncanny precision. The man he saw at 10 p.m. was walking with a sense of direction, not panic. He wasn't shouting, running, or stopping for help. He was simply moving through the shadows, purposeful, discreet. If the man seen by both Tanner and Smith was indeed Jerry McCann, the implications are explosive. It would mean the McCanns had knowledge of Madeleine's death and attempted to cover it up by pretending she had been abducted. This would explain the inconsistencies in their statements, the defensive postures in interviews, and their refusal to participate in certain lines of questioning. This possibility becomes even more plausible when paired with other known facts: the blood and cadaver scent found in the apartment and rental car, the missing tennis bag that may have been used to transport her body, and the total absence of forensic evidence supporting an intruder's entry. In contrast, there is a growing body of circumstantial evidence suggesting that something far more intimate and tragic happened in apartment 5A. In the end, neither Jane Tanner nor Martin Smith ever received closure. Their testimonies were filed, discussed, and then quietly pushed aside by those who had already decided on the narrative of abduction. But to many independent investigators and critical followers of the case, these eyewitness accounts remain among the most compelling pieces in a deeply fractured puzzle. If the man both witnesses described was indeed Jerry McCann, then Madeleine's final journey was not into the hands of a stranger, but carried in the arms of her own father silently, through the dark, toward a patch of brush and earth. No one thought to search that first night. And that, perhaps, is the greatest tragedy of all. As investigators and the world focused on the theory of abduction, another possibility lay hidden just steps away from apartment 5A. This alternate path leads not through doors and windows, but out the back into the shadows, into silence. For those who believe Madeleine McCann died in that apartment, the question has always been, if she died there, where did her body go? And the answer may lie just beyond the garden hedge. Apartment 5A, where the McCann family was staying, is located on the ground floor of a block within the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz. Unlike many upper-level holiday units, this one had direct access to a small, enclosed backyard through a rear patio door. That door led to a shared garden area, which then opened up onto a narrow, unlit footpath. This path ran adjacent to a patch of overgrown bushes, scrubland, and a disused tennis court. The terrain there was uneven, cluttered with natural cover, and crucially not under surveillance by any cameras. At night, this area was pitch black. There were no streetlights, no pedestrian traffic, no security patrols. It was one of the few places within proximity of the apartment where someone could move without being seen. And it was mere seconds away, just a few dozen meters. This physical proximity, combined with its isolation, makes the area a prime location for a discreet, temporary concealment. One statement from the case files noted plainly, Apartment 5A sits right next to an overgrown field and dense shrubbery, completely unlit at night. A body could easily be hidden here without being discovered quickly. From the patio, one could slip out the back unnoticed. The garden led directly to this secluded strip, bypassing the public areas where neighbors or other tourists might be watching. For anyone in a state of panic, confusion, or desperation, it would have been the path of least resistance, the path that buys time. And time, in this case, is everything. There exists a crucial, nearly 1-hour window in the timeline of May 3, 2007. At 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann said he entered the apartment to check on the children and found nothing out of the ordinary. According to his statement, Madeleine was sleeping peacefully. But from that moment until 10 p.m., when Kate McCann raised the alarm upon discovering Madeleine missing, there is no independent verification of Jerry's whereabouts. No other adult in the group saw him during that time. No guest or passerby reported his movements. It is, in every sense, a black hole in the case. This unexplained gap is not a minor oversight. In the context of a missing person case, especially involving a child, an unaccounted hour is an eternity. And in this particular narrative, where Jerry had direct access to a dark, unmonitored exit, and where dogs would later detect both blood and cadaver scent in the living area, this gap in time becomes more than suspicious. It becomes a focal point. Why was this vital area, the bushes, the tennis court, the field behind the apartment, not searched immediately and thoroughly? The answer may lie in the initial direction of the investigation. Portuguese police, under the assumption of an abduction, concentrated on border alerts, roadblocks, and coastal surveillance. The most logical and accessible terrain near the apartment was, for all intents and purposes, left untouched in those critical early hours. This failure was later acknowledged by lead investigator Gons, Olo Amaral. Reflecting on the initial response, he admitted, "We may have missed a golden opportunity in the first 48 hours." That statement, simple, almost casual, belays a haunting reality. What might they have found had they searched that field before sunrise? The terrain itself would have made concealment tragically easy. The area behind the apartment was dense with growth bushes, uneven ground, large rocks, and tall grass. In the darkness, a child's body could have been hidden under foliage, behind a mound, or even placed in a shallow natural depression, undetectable without thermal imaging or daylight. And the most chilling part, this would not have required extensive effort or planning. It would have taken minutes. This scenario becomes even more plausible when paired with the emotional and psychological state of someone who has just discovered the body of their child. If Madeleine died in a tragic accident, perhaps from a fall in the living room, as some suggest, Jerry may have found her, realized she was beyond help, and in a moment of sheer panic, chosen concealment over confrontation. Not out of malice, but fear of prison, fear of losing his medical license, fear of the twins growing up as orphans. In this moment, the bushland behind 5A becomes more than terrain. It becomes a symbol of delay, denial, and desperation. It offers just enough time to create a narrative, to open a window, to move objects, to erase signs. The very possibility that the body was hidden there, if only for a few hours or overnight, adds devastating weight to the notion that this was never an abduction at all. Later, when the search began in earnest, and when police and press swarmed the apartment, the terrain behind it had already served its purpose. The body, if ever there, was gone. According to some reconstructions, the body may have been moved to another location, possibly transported using the now Infamous Renault scenic vehicle rented by the McCanns 24 days after Madelein's disappearance. Both cadaver and blood dogs reacted to the car's trunk. DNA consistent with Madelein's profile was found in it. And yet, because the initial concealment site, the field behind apartment 5A, was not preserved or examined with urgency, the chain of evidence was broken before it began. In conclusion, the hidden place was not miles away. It was not the ocean, or a cave, or a trafficking ring. It was right there behind the back door. It was known to the person who lived in that apartment. It was never secured, and it may be where the truth, for a few crucial hours, lay buried. Sometimes, it's not what investigators find that tells the story. It's what quietly disappears. In the case of Madeleine McCann, one such item stands out not because of its presence, but because of its unexplained absence. A large blue tennis bag regularly used by Jerry McCann in the days leading up to his daughter's disappearance. This ordinary-looking sports bag, seen by several witnesses at the Ocean Club Resort, has since vanished without a trace. And for many observers of the case, its disappearance raises more questions than most of the evidence left behind. Before May 3, 2007, Jerry McCann was often seen carrying a green-colored sports bag around the resort. It was large enough to fit multiple tennis rackets, towels, and gear, and he used it frequently during his visits to the club's tennis courts. Staff, friends, and possibly other holiday guests noted the bag's appearance on numerous occasions. It became, for those around him, a familiar item, just another part of Jerry's daily routine as a vacationing father who enjoyed his morning games. But after the night Madeleine disappeared, something changed. The blue tennis bag, once so visible, so present, was never seen again. When the Portuguese police collected all relevant evidence from the McCann's apartment and their later rented vehicle, they inventoried every object. Clothing, suitcases, electronics, and bedding were all cataloged. Yet nowhere in the official list of items seized does the blue tennis bag appear. It wasn't found in the apartment. It wasn't in the car. It wasn't stored with the other luggage or left behind in the resort. In short, it had vanished. According to the case file, the bag was never recovered or formally identified as part of the investigation, despite multiple witness accounts confirming its existence before May 3. This absence is not a small oversight. It's a potentially critical piece of physical evidence that simply slipped through the cracks. The implications of the bag's disappearance depend largely on how one views the core question of the case. Did Madeleine McCann die in apartment 5A? Those who support the theory that Madeleine died in the apartment, either from an accident or a more sinister event, often point to the bag as the most plausible method of moving her body discreetly. A 3-year-old child is small, lightweight, and tragically easy to conceal. Investigators and forensic experts agree that the size of the bag Jerry used for tennis could reasonably accommodate a child's remains. In a moment of panic or desperation, using the bag would have been a practical and efficient choice. The theory suggests the following sequence. After Madeleine's death, Jerry hid her body temporarily, perhaps in the underbrush near the back of the apartment. Then, either in the early hours of May 4 or in the days that followed, he returned with the tennis bag, placed her inside, and removed her body undetected. That movement may have coincided with the McCanns' use of a Renault scenic rental car, obtained 24 days later, which would later test positive for both cadaver scent and DNA with a partial match to Madeleine. The fact that both the bag and the car form part of this potential chain of disposal strengthens the theory. If the body was first hidden, then retrieved and moved by car, the bag becomes the central vessel for that operation. And its disappearance isn't just odd, it could indicate deliberate concealment. But why would Jerry, or anyone, for that matter, go through the trouble of making the bag disappear? This is where behavior and psychology intersect with evidence. If the bag was used to carry Madeleine's body, it would likely contain trace DNA, hair, skin cells, or even bodily fluids. It would be incriminating in a way that few other pieces of evidence could be. Destroying the bag, burning it, discarding it far from the resort, or even burying it, would eliminate a major forensic threat. It's the kind of action someone takes not in the immediate aftermath of panic, but in the calculated mindset of covering their tracks. Conversely, if Jerry had nothing to hide, why did an object he used daily and openly suddenly cease to exist? Why didn't it appear in police photos? Why didn't it end up in the property list? Why hasn't it been mentioned or explained by the McCanns in the many interviews and media appearances since? The silence surrounding the bag is telling. Some may argue that the bag was misplaced, lost, or innocently discarded amid the chaos of the investigation. But that explanation fails under scrutiny. The Ocean Club apartment was thoroughly searched. The McCanns' belongings were packed and itemized. Their vehicle was examined forensically. Yet a large, easily identifiable bag simply disappeared. Even nearly 2 decades later, the bag has never resurfaced. In all the independent reinvestigations, media documentaries, and case reviews, none have identified where it went or what happened to it. That enduring absence becomes more conspicuous with each passing year. The disappearance of the tennis bag, on its own, is not proof of wrongdoing. But when placed in the context of a missing child, DNA in a rental car, cadaver scent in a living room, and inconsistencies in timelines, it becomes deeply suspicious. In fact, it may be one of the only tangible, missing links in a case built on missing answers. Investigators familiar with forensic concealment tactics have remarked that bags are often destroyed or buried after being used in body transport. They are rarely left behind, because even when cleaned, trace evidence can remain embedded in fibers for years. This makes them high-risk items for anyone trying to erase their involvement. So perhaps the blue tennis bag didn't just disappear, it was erased. In that context, the vanishing of a simple sports bag becomes a symbol of what might have happened behind that apartment's back door, a symbol of the story that may have been rewritten in panic, a symbol of what the world still doesn't know, and what someone, somewhere, never wanted to be found. The Renault Scenic was not just a rented car. It became a symbol of something darker, a container of suspicion, a carrier of forensic silence. 24 days after Madeleine McCann was reported missing from apartment 5A at the Ocean Club in Praia de Luz, Portugal, the McCann family rented a silver Renault Scenic. By this point, global attention had cemented the case as one of the most high-profile child disappearances of the 21st century. The pressure was unrelenting, the theories multiplying. But what investigators found, or rather, what trained dogs reacted to, would soon raise disturbing questions. Cadaver dog Eddie and blood dog Keela, both from the South Yorkshire Police K9 unit, had been brought in to search the McCanns' new vehicle. The result was chilling. Eddie alerted to the scent of a human cadaver in the trunk. Keela, trained to detect human blood, also responded. Subsequent forensic analysis detected a sample in the trunk's compartment, with 15 out of 19 DNA markers matching Madeleine McCann. 15 out of 19. It was not enough to confirm legally. Yet it was far more than coincidence. Experts noted that such a match, while not conclusive in a court of law, was statistically significant. The sample did not come from hair or tissue, but from bodily fluids absorbed into the carpet lining of the vehicle. The troubling question emerged: if Madeleine had died in the apartment on May 3rd, how did her DNA end up in a car rented on May 27th? Jerry and Kate McCann offered no satisfying explanation. Publicly, they maintained that the DNA traces could have come from dirty diapers or transferred clothing, but the scent of cadaver, which dogs are trained to detect with extreme specificity, could not be explained away so easily. Investigators, especially in the Polizia Judiciaria, began to examine a possible timeline. If the child had indeed died in the apartment, and if the body had been temporarily hidden, then the Renault Scenic might have been used to transport it later, possibly under cover of night, when the media frenzy had momentarily receded. This theory, while speculative, gained credibility due to one critical factor: a digital silence. An analysis of Jerry McCann's phone records showed a conspicuous blackout from 21 to 23:30 on the night Madeleine disappeared. In the age of digital footprints, such a void stands out. On other days, his phone activity was normal, but on the night that everything unraveled, there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no GPS, nothing. It was as if Jerry McCann had vanished from the network. This silence extended beyond electronics. During the Portuguese police interviews, Kate McCann refused to answer 48 direct questions, including fundamental ones such as, "Why didn't you check if the bedroom door was locked?" And, "Why didn't you raise the alarm immediately?" Instead, the McCanns hired top-tier PR teams and legal advisors within days of the disappearance. The message was curated, the image polished, and the press briefings tightly controlled. To seasoned investigators, this was not the behavior of grieving parents, it was the playbook of a media containment strategy. While grief is unpredictable, silence under scrutiny is rarely innocent. The psychological profile that emerged was not one of killers, but of two parents who had possibly made a fatal mistake and were now operating under an imperative stronger than guilt: survival. Jerry and Kate were both doctors. Their careers, licenses, and reputations were built on trust. To lose that, not just their daughter, but their lives as they knew it, would be a second death. A preventable one. A disgrace with no reversal. Thus emerged a plausible motive for concealment, not malice. The silence in their digital records, their avoidance of key questions, and the failure to explain forensic findings did not point to sadistic intent. Rather, it reflected a strategy, however flawed, of minimizing irreversible loss. Despite massive funding, global support, and technological advancements, the body of Madeleine McCann has never been found. The Renault Scenic was eventually returned. The evidence contested. The suspicions. If there is one constant in this story, it is the refusal to speak, not just to the press or to the public, but to the truth itself. The silence, however, was not merely digital or forensic. It spread into every aspect of the investigation. When key questions were raised by authorities, journalists, and even members of the public, they were met with carefully curated responses or, at times, outright refusal. The McCanns were rarely seen breaking down or showing the raw anguish expected from grieving parents. Instead, they remained composed, strategic, almost clinical. Critics argued that the couple's medical background may have contributed to this posture, trained to remain calm under pressure, conditioned to avoid emotional outbursts. But others saw in their behavior not stoicism, but suppression. What were they trying to contain? Grief or guilt? The Renault Scenic, returned to the rental company, became a subject of lasting controversy. Independent analysts and investigators debated the integrity of the DNA evidence, the timing of collection, the risk of contamination. Yet despite the technical debates, the presence of any biological link to Madeleine in that vehicle, weeks after her disappearance, remains deeply troubling. Adding to the suspicion was the behavior of the PR team the McCanns had hired. Rather than assist police, many journalists noted that their primary role appeared to be managing public perception. Negative press was rebutted with legal threats. Dissenting voices were labeled conspiratorial. And over time, a climate of intimidation began to form around the case. This strategy, effective in the court of public opinion, proved corrosive in the realm of public trust. When silence becomes institutionalized, truth becomes harder to access, not only for investigators but for society at large. Scientific findings that led nowhere, legal barriers that protected the powerful, and a grieving family that seemed to fear the truth more than the lie. Over the years, public interest surged and waned. Netflix documentaries, tabloid headlines, anniversary coverage, all contributed to a fog of sensationalism that often obscured the facts. The signal was drowned in noise, and still, the silence within that trunk spoke louder than any press release. To this day, no charges have been filed in relation to the forensic evidence in the Renault Scenic. The DNA markers, so close to conclusive, were shelved. And the silence, across phone records, courtrooms, and public statements, was never broken. Some believe that the truth lies in a single decision made late that night, not to tell. That decision may have originated in fear, but it was fed by time, protected by resources, and shielded by silence. The car was just a prop. The real vehicle of concealment was human will. Until someone breaks the silence, it will remain just another car, parked forever on the roadside of justice. One that unraveled quietly behind the scenes while the world watched a grieving couple search for their missing child. What if Madeleine McCann died on the night of May 3, 2007? What if her death was not the result of malice but a tragic accident? A fall, perhaps in a moment of parental negligence? And what if the overwhelming instinct in that moment wasn't to confess, but to survive? The evidence doesn't scream. It whispers, through silences, contradictions, and choices made at critical junctures. There was no forced entry into apartment 5A. No signs of a struggle. No screams were heard. But there was an unlocked back door. There was a timeline filled with gaps. There were DNA traces and the unmistakable alerts of cadaver dogs. There was a missing tennis bag, an unaccounted for hour, and the dead space in Jerry McCann's phone records. More than any single clue, it was the coordinated response that raised red flags. Kate McCann refused to answer 48 specific questions posed by Portuguese police, including basic queries like, "Did you check the bedroom window?" and "Why didn't you scream when you discovered she was missing?" These weren't complex legal traps. They were essential questions in any missing child case. She declined all of them. The McCanns quickly hired a PR team and lawyers, not a local translator, not a family advocate, public relations experts, media strategists, spin doctors. While Portuguese investigators struggled with limited resources, the McCanns had access to one of the most well-funded and controlled media narratives in modern criminal history. This was not just about mourning a child. It was about protecting reputations, careers, licenses. Both parents were doctors. A charge of negligence, let alone concealment, could end their medical careers. A conviction could result in prison and the loss of custody of their two remaining children. And so began what many believe was not a search for a daughter, but a campaign to preserve everything else. By 4 a.m. on the morning of May 4th, search efforts around Praia da Luz had been paused. The streets had quieted. The press had yet to descend in full force. If there was ever a window to move a body, away from the underbrush or temporary hiding place, that was it. From that point forward, the investigation would face obstacles at every turn. The McCanns released photos, but denied certain forensic inquiries. They welcomed media interviews, but pushed back on police questions. The narrative hardened. Madeleine was abducted. No alternatives would be entertained. Even when new leads emerged, such as the cadaver dog alerts or the DNA in the Renault Scenic, every effort was made to downplay or discredit. Scientific findings were reframed as inconclusive. Witness testimony was marginalized. The McCann's legal team turned the spotlight away from substance and toward process. To many observers, this wasn't just defense. It was orchestration. Behind the scenes, the British government played an unusually active role. High-level diplomatic support was extended. Media coverage in the UK remained overwhelmingly sympathetic. Doubts and dissenters were painted as conspiracy theorists or heartless cynics. Any deviation from the official narrative was treated as an attack on grieving parents. But grief doesn't erase accountability. If a child died in that apartment, and if her body was moved, then every hour, every step, every statement afterward must be examined not as the efforts of desperate parents, but as potential acts of concealment. The psychological dimension is critical. The idea of shielding surviving children from the trauma of legal fallout, of avoiding public shame, of holding the family together. These are deeply human motivations. They are also deeply dangerous when they subvert justice. The longer a lie survives, the more sacred it becomes to those who told it. Years passed. Investigations restarted, then stalled. Funding rose and fell. The public remained divided. But through it all, a haunting pattern endured, an absence of transparency, an avoidance of difficult questions, and a relentless control of the narrative. This is the true cost of the cover-up, not only the possible death of Madeleine McCann, but the death of truth itself. Because if the worst did happen that night, if a child died, and her death was hidden, then silence is no longer an act of mourning. It's a continuation of the crime. And if those responsible are still protected by that silence, then justice has already lost. The cost was not limited to the investigation. It reached into public trust in institutions, media, and justice. Every press conference managed, every uncomfortable question sidestepped, deepened the chasm between what was known and what was believed. This divide created an environment where speculation thrived. Online forums exploded with theories, some wild, some disturbingly plausible. The longer the silence persisted, the more oxygen it gave to doubt. The McCann case became not just a tragedy, but a symbol of how influence, image, and control can override accountability. Meanwhile, the Portuguese police faced enormous pressure and criticism, both locally and abroad. Internal rifts formed. Lead investigator Goncalo Amaral was removed. His book, later banned then reinstated, argued bluntly, the parents knew more than they ever admitted. He wasn't alone in thinking that. And still, Madeleen's whereabouts remain unknown. In the end, the cost of the cover-up is not just the absence of truth, but the erosion of belief that truth is still possible. The world watched a child vanish, and then watched the story be told, not by evidence, but by those with the loudest voices and the strongest shields. A cover-up, no matter how carefully maintained, is not justice. It is simply a deferral of reckoning, and the longer it endures, the heavier that reckoning becomes. One day, someone may finally speak. Until then, the silence remains a co-conspirator. There is also the psychological burden that such a cover-up inflicts over time. When truth is buried, it does not disappear, it festers. It demands maintenance. The lie must be protected, repeated, justified. Each media interview becomes a performance. Each public appearance a risk. And each anniversary a reminder, not just of loss, but of the secret kept to avoid the storm. Supporters of the McCanns often argue that no parent would ever hide the death of their child. But history and psychology suggest otherwise. Fear can override morality. The instinct to protect one's remaining family, reputation, and livelihood can become so overpowering that it justifies actions otherwise unthinkable. If there was a moment when the McCanns could have told the truth, it may have been within the first 48 hours. But once that moment passed, every hour thereafter made the truth more dangerous and the lie more necessary. That is how cover-ups grow, not as grand conspiracies, but as small decisions made in desperation, hardened by time, and shielded by silence. And perhaps that is the most sobering truth of all. Justice was not stolen in one dramatic act, but lost in 100 quiet choices. Nearly 2 decades have passed since Madeleine McCann vanished from apartment 5A in Praia da Luz. Yet, no body has ever been found, no definitive answers have emerged, and no resolution has brought peace, not to the investigators, not to the public, and certainly not to the truth. The question lingers like a shadow: where is Madeleine? Despite countless leads, reopened inquiries, and international collaboration, the mystery persists. But perhaps the mystery endures not because of what we don't know, but because of what we refuse to acknowledge. There are details that refuse to be buried. The Renault Scenic still carries suspicion. DNA evidence found in its trunk matched to Madeleine. Cadaver dogs alerted to the smell of death. The car was rented 24 days after her disappearance. These facts have not changed. The green tennis bag, seen with Jerry McCann before the night of May 3rd, was never found. Not by police, not on any inventory list. A bag large enough to hold a small child disappeared entirely, without explanation. Martin Smith, the Irish tourist who saw a man carrying a lifeless blonde girl around 22, later stated he was 80% certain the man was Jerry McCann. His testimony never changed, even as the media narrative tried to shift focus. And still, the silence continues. Where is the explanation for the DNA, for the missing bag, for the untraceable hour between 21:05 and 22? What if the answer lies not in new evidence, but in old patterns? What if the system, legal, political, and media, chose preservation over confrontation? In the years since, The McCann case has become a symbol of something larger, a failure of justice, not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public accountability. The Portuguese police made critical errors in the first 48 hours. Delays, missed searches, and the absence of full perimeter control. No cameras covered the back entrance to the apartment. No one verified the condition of the shutters. Assumptions replaced evidence. Sympathy replaced scrutiny. By the time doubts emerged, the narrative was locked. The UK media, with few exceptions, rallied behind the McCanns. PR firms managed the public image. Critical voices were sued or silenced. The British government offered diplomatic protections, rarely seen in such cases. It wasn't just about a missing girl. It became about national reputation, media narratives, and institutional credibility. And so, a case that began with a child's disappearance morphed into something else, a fortified structure of doubt, silence, and curated storylines. The public has not forgotten. Online forums, independent journalists, and cold, case analysts continue to ask the uncomfortable questions. But they are drowned out by legal threats, fatigue, and the passage of time. There is no proof Madeleine is alive. There is no proof she was abducted. And yet, the official line continues to echo, we're looking for a missing child. Not a homicide. Not a cover-up. A disappearance. That distinction changes everything. If Madeleine died that night, the person who knows is someone close. If someone helped conceal that death, then the silence is not ignorance, it is protection. And if institutions enabled that silence, then the failure is collective. So, where is she now? Perhaps nowhere we can find. Perhaps nowhere we're allowed to look. But the bigger question is, why has the system accepted this not knowing? The cost is not just to one child. It's to every child whose case may be deprioritized because of influence, narrative, or image. And what of justice? Justice doesn't only mean arrests or convictions. Sometimes, it means naming what happened, no matter how long it takes. Sometimes, it means confronting what everyone suspects, but no one dares say. If someone, anyone, holds the key to this truth and remains silent, they are no longer protecting a child. We live in a world where missing children become hashtags, but not all receive the same pursuit of truth. Some cases get justice. Others get management. And so, the question remains, if not now, then when will the truth matter? Time, in theory, should bring clarity. But in the case of Madeleine McCann, time has brought distortion. The longer the case remains unsolved, the more versions of the truth compete for dominance. Conspiracy theories multiply. Genuine analysis is drowned in white noise. Officials come and go, statements change, but the original facts, the blood, the dogs, the timeline, remain quietly immutable. The issue isn't the lack of data. It's the lack of will to pursue it. When the parents of a missing child are treated as victims beyond question. When lines of inquiry are closed not for lack of evidence, but for political convenience, the integrity of the justice process fractures. And the public senses it. This case has become a mirror, not just reflecting what happened in apartment 5A, but what happens when narratives are curated and institutions protect themselves more than the vulnerable. Thousands of children go missing every year. Most are found. Some never are. But few receive the level of coverage and shielding that this case did. And that disparity is not just about fame. It's about who is allowed to shape the story and who is not. If Madeleine's body was ever hidden, whether in the underbrush, in a bag, or later moved by vehicle, then someone knows. That knowledge is not abstract. It exists. And so long as it is kept private, the silence becomes participatory. In the absence of legal resolution, the public holds the burden of memory. We are left to examine the timeline, the testimony, the missing links. Not because we want to play detective, but because those tasked with solving this chose ambiguity. There's a tendency to avoid uncomfortable truths, especially when they implicate people once seen as victims. But that reluctance is corrosive. It teaches the next generation that image matters more than accountability. This isn't just about Madeleine, it's about trust. Trust in justice, in facts, in the idea that no one is above the truth. And truth, in this case, has been suffocated by reputation management and legal strategy. That is why the final question matters so deeply. Because if this case cannot be solved, despite its resources, attention, and reach, what hope is there for the ones that go unnoticed? If this child can disappear, and the system can look away, then silence is not just the absence of sound. It is policy. And if that is the world we accept, then what kind of justice are we really seeking? The time to speak is now. The time to care was yesterday. But the time to answer, the time to finally confront the questions no one wants to ask, is long overdue. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann has left behind not just unanswered questions, but also critical lessons for missing child investigations. One of the most revealing elements lies in the initial response of family members. Jerry McCann's behavior in the first few minutes after discovering his daughter was missing did not follow expected norms. Rather than panicking or rushing outside to search, he reportedly returned to the apartment, showing little urgency. Investigators quickly noted this anomaly. It reinforces a central truth. The first actions of close individuals can contain powerful clues and must be carefully documented, as they may reveal discrepancies between appearance and intention. The case also underscores the irreplaceable value of searching every surrounding area within the first 48 hours. Chief Investigator Gonzalo Amaral later admitted that his team failed to inspect the bushes and vacant land immediately behind apartment 5A during the first night. This omission potentially allowed crucial evidence to disappear and highlights how even the most inconspicuous places, especially those lacking lighting or surveillance, must be prioritized. Another underutilized tool in this case was the use of cadaver and blood dogs. Eddie and Keela, highly trained dogs from the South Yorkshire Police, alerted to multiple key areas, including the bedroom, car trunk, and Kate McCann's clothing. Despite these consistent reactions, the evidence was not pursued with the seriousness it warranted. The lesson is clear. Data from trained dogs must be scientifically followed up and treated as investigative leads, not dismissed due to lack of visual confirmation. The physical evidence also teaches us that traces can be deliberately obscured. A diluted blood sample, found only after Keela indicated a hidden source beneath tiles, suggested an attempt to wipe or wash away key traces. It was not visible to the naked eye, showing how forensic methods must anticipate efforts to destroy evidence, especially fluid-based traces like blood or bodily fluids. The case also features several unresolved anomalies that were never fully investigated. These include the mysterious disappearance of Jerry's green tennis bag, the back door left ajar, and Martin Smith's strong claim that he saw Jerry carrying a child that night. Each irregularity raises red flags. In investigations, anything that suddenly disappears or behaves inconsistently should never be brushed aside as coincidence. Personal belongings must also be considered potential evidence. The green tennis bag Jerry routinely carried vanished after Madeleine disappeared. If it was used to move a body, its disappearance becomes a major evidentiary gap. Every object once habitually seen but now missing deserves careful forensic tracing. Finally, media influence and testimony inconsistency played major roles. Media pressure skewed investigative direction toward abduction theories, sidelining more plausible scenarios. Meanwhile, contradictions between statements from the McCanns and friends created confusion and broke timeline coherence. This shows that both media interference and unchecked testimony inconsistencies can derail even the most critical investigations. In short, the McCann case is a cautionary study in how precision, urgency, and rigor must be maintained from the first moment, and why even the smallest deviations may carry the greatest weight.